Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's remote session. This is Tom Bechtold, your host from Secure World Digital. Today, we're talking about the life of the party, how to make third-party risk management a connector across the business. Now, a lot of you are thinking, now, how is that a party, right? But you know what? It kind of is, right? Because great third-party management thrives on alignment between different groups within your business, whether it's procurement, infosec, which most of you folks are out there, sales, legal, and of course different vendors, right? So we've got all of these different components, and you'd think it would make that risk team the most popular people at the party, right? Because everybody has to come to them for stuff, right? But really, from what we're hearing, it feels like it's more like you're in the eye of the storm and stuff's just kind of swirling around you, and you're kind of like, oh my gosh, how do I get my arms around this stuff? Right. So today we're hopefully going to do that a little bit. So I've invited a couple of gentlemen to the conversation. We're going to be talking about this stuff. A lot of organizations, that alignment piece, unfortunately, it's a nice to have rather than a must or a have to have. So we're going to bring that into today's session as well. We're going to see how your teams can move that needle in alignment in some way. Even just little bits can help. We're not talking about launching it a mile out there, but if you can, hey, let's do it, right? But even just those inches, one step in front of the other, it helps, and that's what we're going to hopefully help you guys here today with. So we're going to talk about alignment, what that looks like. What is it? Honestly, I don't know what that really means, so I'm going to find out for you guys. We're going to set the stage, right? So see what that is. So I've got the perfect panel of guests with us today, I think. We've got, they're going to help us with this challenge. So we're going to be joined with John Finizio. He's the Vice President of Security, Risk and Compliance at Whistic, who, by the way, is our sponsor for today's program. So thank you for being our sponsor. We really appreciate that. We can't do these without the sponsors and the presenters. So I want to say thank you also to Tom Garuba. He is internationally recognized thought leader. He's a lecturer and a writer on business, cyber, and privacy risk. We're going to get more into their backstories in just a minute. If you're new to the program, though, I want to give you just a quick guide, if you will, to the conversation. Everything, I've got a lot of stuff in our resource tab. We've got a couple of resources from the folks over at Whistic talking about third-party risk. You'll want to definitely grab that. If you need slides as proof of attendance, you can grab those. It's a PDF. There's not a lot of juicy stuff on there. John's got some great information on his slides, but mine are pretty much just kind of bookends. So if you're looking for a lot of great information, make sure you grab them, but John's stuff is going to be the most pertinent. But it will serve as proof of attendance. I do have a nice PDF that you can download as well after about 45 minutes that you can use for your different certifying bodies. We are recording this, so this will be available on demand on our website for the next 6 months. So if you see or hear something that you like, come back, please, or share it with a colleague. I say this all the time, but collaboration really is the only silver bullet we have right now in InfoSec. So please collaborate, share this information. It's free, plus you get CPE credits. So that being said, let's get moving on. I actually have a question for you out in the audience. So if you don't mind, which best describes the current maturity of your third-party risk management program? So I've got some different options there for you. If you wouldn't mind, vote. This is really just to kind of see where our conversation should kind of start and go to today. So no wrong answers here. Just kind of get an idea of where you guys are all coming from today. So you're either at the initial phase, you're reactive, it's informal, it's ad hoc. You've got a defined phase. Maybe you've got a managed phase where it's proactive, the approach, going to it, repeatable processes. Things seem like they're probably going pretty well, right? Maybe it's optimized, man. You guys are really just going for it, and you really have stakeholder buy-in, all of this. So let's give you guys a moment or two to vote, if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll kind of, I'm going to, introduce more of our guys. So I think I need to take a sip of coffee here, and then we'll get moving. Not sponsored by that company, by the way. Okay, all right. So let's see. I'm going to come back to the results in just a second, but let's hear from our guys. They've been sitting here patiently for the last 5 minutes while I rattle on about stuff. John Finizio, Vice President, Security, Risk, and Compliance over at Whistic. John, my friend, tell us a little bit about your backstory, if you wouldn't mind. What's been cool and exciting? What got you to this point?
Yeah, I'd say it's been a kind of a roundabout, not a linear kind of path to how I ended up here. But I like to say I've been in the TPRM sandbox, but kind of in the playground, playing in different sandboxes, right? So kind of seeing this thing from every different angle. So able to kind of bring I think, a unique perspective to this function, right? Whether that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the practitioner and coming up and, performing assessments and the kind of the technical aspect of that, or leading people, or providing more of a, market facing solution, in a commercial setting, from a product perspective. So have held different seats and seen different angles. Now kind of sitting at the security seat here at Whistic, able to kind of pull all that together and kind of provide, I'd say, a really unique perspective to the third party risk space and I'd say the evolving approach.
Sounds great. Welcome, sir. Happy to have you here. And I think this is the first time I've had you on, so welcome. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Let's jump over to Tom Garuba, which I see we have a typo on the slide. That's my mistake. Sorry about that, Tom. He's the Director of Third-Party Risk Management Services over at Echelon Risk and Cyber. Welcome, sir. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of your backstory.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. I've been in the third-party risk space for more than a dozen years. My background has been in IT audit, privacy, security, compliance, the whole gamut, covering everything. This is for third-party risk management, which has probably been in existence probably for about close to 15, 16 years. It's still a very young industry. And there's still a lot that needs to be done in this space. There's a lot with respect to everything from whether it's standardization, whether it's process honing in on your processes. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but who should own this thing? Where does it belong? And you're going to see gamuts, of organizations trying to cover this and trying to find the right fit. And I've always said, wherever it's going to get the attention it deserves and how you scope it properly, that's so important. So, but third-party risk, it's front in mind of the C-suite. It's front in mind of a lot of executives. Upwards of 85 to 90% of any organization's processing in some way, shape, or form is being done by a third party. So that's why you're seeing a lot of eyes that are focused on what is being done with those particular vendors, because as an outsourcer, you're on the hook for this.
Not to mention, we keep hearing about it in the news. I mean, we keep hearing that somebody's partner was kind of the entry point, right? So right. Let's take a look at those the poll results real quick and kind of see where the folks were coming from in the audience. Looking like a lot of folks are kind of in that managed phase, or at least have a defined phase. Is that kind of surprising to you guys? What you're seeing out in the field? What do you guys think?
I mean, I'll take a crack at that, but this isn't really surprising, right? You kind of see a growing percentage across the initial phases, which means, hey, there's folks starting out. It's interesting, if you're coming from a large enterprise, you probably have been doing this, like Tom said, for probably the last 10 plus years. So you've evolved and have had a chance to get it to that point. I'm exposed to a lot of customers that really are literally just starting this journey, right? So they're in that initial phase. It's really good to see kind of that number growing and not inversed, right? Is where we have a high percentage just starting out and kind of lower with tons of room to grow and improve. So this is actually really promising numbers to kind of see them broken out by the phases. What do you think, Tom?
No, John, I agree with you. I expected to see people in either those defined phases or managed phases. There's a lot of organizations, big, and medium size, that are just now being tasked to do this. I have a friend of mine who was a chief compliance officer at a large hotel hospitality chain, who reached out to me over a year ago and said, "Hey, Tom, I just got out of a meeting with the CIO, and they turned to me and said, 'Congratulations, you now own third-party risk.'" And she went, "I have no clue what that is, but I know you do." So that's why she reached out to me. So you're seeing companies of various sizes starting to go down this third-party risk journey, and now trying to get a gauge on where do they want to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, et cetera. So it's very important to start those roadmaps.
we may have a really honest audience as well, right? I think you look at the drop off in the optimized phase, which is kind of saying you're never really truly optimized, because even if you're at the forefront, now we're talking about technologies and approaches and changes to third-party risk where, you're never really there. You can be really close, but unless you're, taking on, take AI for instance, right? That's essentially pushing out that optimized target even further. And I think that change, that's going to happen, every year. There's going to be a new thing to kind of consider and kind of fold in. So not surprised with, I guess, with that 5.3% in the optimized phase. I think we got some very conservative risk professionals on the phone here that are cautiously scoring themselves. So
I think that's fair though, because like when I get like surveys and stuff where people are like, "Hey, would you rate this out of 5 stars or whatever?" I rarely do anything with 5 stars because I think everything can have some level of improvement. I wish you could do 4.5, but like it's like I always, especially if it's something for me, because I'm like I always feel like I could do something just a hair better. So, okay, let's move on. We've got another poll question. I want to set the stage here again. Excuse me. Which best describes the state of your alignment with your third-party risk program? Alignment. Does anyone else know we exist? Honestly, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but probably relevant in some cases. Some awareness, but stakeholders don't really understand their role in the process. Kind of like the lady Tom was just talking about at the place. Thanks. This is a promotion. Alignment. I goofed on that one. Gosh, I'm sloppy today. I goofed on this one too. Alignment at the executive leadership level to push the program, but still building partnerships with key stakeholders where you have full alignment. So kind of like the last one on the last poll question, right? You've got kind of the cool process going and everybody's on board now. So if you guys wouldn't mind, take a vote, I should say. I was going to say take a guess, but you should know what you're doing at your company, right? So make your choice. We'll do a couple more people here, and then we will get some results here. Got a lot of ground to cover, a lot of questions. So let's see what you guys are thinking about here. Okay, good. So most people know that you guys exist. I think that's wonderful. There's some awareness. That's about 48%. And you've got your leadership folks at 27. You got full alignment at 18%. That's kind of nice. I kind of was thinking it's some awareness would probably be our sweet spot. That was my guess. Tom, John, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I'm not really surprised by this one either. I think Tom kind of hit it on the head, right? You have CISOs and InfoSec professionals that know this is a critical part of kind of the risk portfolio, third party, and they're tasking that with folks, or they're taking it on themselves, right? So they may have an initial, flag in the ground. We're going to do this without all of the ship and buy-in, right? That's the stuff that kind of takes time to kind of tie in and that connective tissue to the program. So not surprised that we see flags planted, right, in the security and InfoSec or wherever that program lives. And then from there, you kind of, reach out and kind of get that buy-in, start working with your stakeholders. So not too surprised about that. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, John, you make a good point with about planting the flag, but let's not forget that those flags can be moved at any point in time. And I have seen a lot of organizations that take their third-party risk programs and for optimization purposes decide to move it to another organization within the company for utilization purposes. I think one of the things that the attendees here need to understand is when you're talking about alignment, the purpose of the alignment is to make sure that you're operating within the mission statement for your third-party risk program. So if the concentration is in information security, then you're doing information security things. So what I mean by that is you're starting to see third-party risk programs taking on more than just cyber. I used to have the expression, third-party risk isn't just for cyber anymore. So you might have third-party risk programs taking on contract review. They might be taking on things with sourcing and procurement, particularly during the RFP phase. So you might have these additional things, and you might see a shift moving from something along the lines of the CISO over to chief privacy or chief procurement or chief risk, depending on the industry in. And so you have to allow for flexibility and even fluidity to be able to make those adjustments when somebody up at the upper chain decides to move those programs for whatever alignment purpose that is. And John, you and I've had this conversation in the past too, and I think this is important to note. There's also organizations that opt to put their third-party risk programs in the first line of defense. So by putting it in the first line of defense, you still need that governing body at the second line from a compliance perspective. But it's important to make sure that you have those proper alignments flowing in through the various business units into that second line.
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, there's a question in the chat that I want to address, right? Is you kind of have this foundation around third party, plant the flag. Let's just go with that analogy, right? And then you kind of expand from there. Things ebb and flow, right? As there's different risks that come up or different technologies that you're trying to consider. A good example in the chat there is like the supply chain risk management, right? And the SBOM. So that's kind of we have this huge initiative. There was an executive order put out by the president on SBOM. Thoughts on that are, that's a great, when you see something put out like that, it's typically, I don't want this to sound bad, but it takes time to digest, right? So I see that come out. It's like, when are we going to actually move the needle on that, right? On software bill of materials. It's going to take time, but an action like that simply starts the conversation. So I know there's large enterprises that are working closely with government to do the hard work, to figure out how that operates in practice, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. So we're having conversations on how we could integrate and enable a software bill of materials for some of our customers that are looking to be more forward-thinking, kind of first movers on that. But there's still a lot of work to be done to nail that down from an operational standpoint. So I think the important thing is you're aware of it, right? And you're starting to think about it, how it fits in, how you integrate it in an appropriate manner, and just kind of evolve with the trend. And that's just one example, right? So great question. Thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, keep those coming. We should have plenty of time toward the end for lots of questions. So keep those coming in. John, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me get you to the right slide. You had a few slides you were going to share with us. So if you wouldn't mind, take us through your part, and then we'll do all the questions.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is kind of the general topic of today, right? TPRM program alignment. In my words and our words, what is that, right? At a high level, we think that's ensuring the activities, goals, and objectives of your program are not just siloed within your program, right? They're in sync with the business, right? Other interest requirements, business objectives of the broader organization and the stakeholders that are really critical and required for you to, deliver on your program, right? You can ask this question to a number of different people. You'll probably get a number of different answers, but at a high level, this is what we talk about when we say alignment, right? I got a picture there of a mountaintop. If anyone knows what mountain that is, throw it in the Slack. There'll be bonus points. Tom B, we have prizes for our guests, maybe. Anyway, so we start with kind of the end in mind, right? This is the mountaintop, right? We want to have our program aligned and connected to our business, right? Today, we're going to talk about kind of how we get there, the ways that we can get there, either through different approaches, different types of alignment. And I think we'll be spending the majority of the time talking about the different stakeholder groups and what to expect when, working with them and achieving program alignment with those different functional groups. So yeah, getting, said another way, right? These are just the rules of engagement. Are they known by your program and the stakeholders that you interact with in order to kind of achieve your program objectives, right? Does everyone know kind of how you fit together and work together with different groups? And is that clear, right? That's kind of a simple question, but really hard to, I think, sort out when you sit down with another, functional leader. So we'll kind of get through some of these, and I'll kind of hand it over to Tom to kind of chime in. But different types of alignment that we talk about here is like strategic, right? So ensuring that your program is, I think this is kind of like the broader enterprise level alignment, right? Does your program, is it fitting in the right way to the overall organization? Does it have that executive support, right? That's going to allow you to be successful, right? This is something that takes time, right? The flag's planted, but actually getting, senior leadership, to support in the right ways and communicate that out to the organization is definitely something that takes time, right? So Tom, anything you want to add to, I guess, this one of the areas where we can focus on achieving alignment kind of at the strategic organizational level?
Right. You need somebody from on high to be able to say, there has to be a third-party risk management program, and what are the lines for going through the program. Okay, and it's so important to understand because you want to make sure that your processes, your procedures, and your policy is documented and adhering to that edict from on high, from the C-suite and or regulators or anything from that nature. So you want to make sure that you are in constant strategic alignment. One of the things that I've always pushed for third-party risk managers and directors to do is you need to have that conversation with the other C-suites and along with the other second-line process leaders to make sure that you're in alignment and your linkages are there, whether it's legal, whether it's sourcing and procurement, whether it's privacy, on and on, to make sure that everybody understands the chain and what they're going to be doing throughout the entire third-party risk management lifecycle. And it's very, very important. So from that strategic perspective, it's good to make sure that management is on board and the business units, including the project management office. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the PMO trying to bypass things to execute a relationship with a particular vendor. So it's very important that you have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Second area of alignment is around operations, right? Operationally, right? So referring to kind of the coordination in those different activities and processes across the business, right? Do you understand the business? And I'm really big on this too, right? To not pigeonhole ourselves as risk professionals and third party, to really have our blinders on when we really want to be seen as a consultant and an advisor to the business. Really requires us to understand the operations of the business, right? Yes, we have a job to do in third party. It's a technical job. That goes without saying, but being able to apply that to unique aspects of your business and the operations is really where we take it, I think, to the next level. And that's where we start to be seen as, strategic partners and advisors to the business. So, do you understand the operations? Do you understand where that third party actually fits into the process? If they fall down or something goes sideways, what does that mean? What are the business objectives, and how does that third party help achieve those, right? That's all going to make us more valuable partners, is really digging into the operational aspects of the business and understanding what those are, right? To me, and spending time in the business has really been the most, I'd say, interesting and exciting part of third party, because you got to see kind of the guts of, I came from JP Morgan Chase. It was fascinating just to dig into all the different processes that support the retail branch or the investment banking, right? You see kind of the guts, how it's made. And that I found that to be really fun, to learn all the different aspects of that. And along the way, you kind of getting smarter, and, adding more value to your business partner along the way. So I think that's a big, big part of that. And just fundamentals as a TPM practitioner, right? But being able to apply the broader business aspect to it, super, super valuable. I'll go to the next one here. And this is, when we say functional alignment, I think we're talking about the organization and coordinating different functions, departments, cyber, risk, compliance, right? Are we working with them? Are we aligning the program to, for instance, the different risk appetite that, may be coming out of a risk function? There may be some alignment opportunity there for cyber or infosec, right? From a policy perspective, right? We have internal policies. Are we applying those to third parties, just, picking it up and, dropping it in a third party space? Or is there some nuance or some difference to what we require of our third party? So spending time with each of those different functional groups to get alignment, you can go on with say legal, getting ahead of those requirements, making sure those security controls and expectations are kind of baked in and built in, from the start. These are all things that we can do with our stakeholders to make our program really more valuable to the overall business. Again, it's going to take time. And we'll kind of get into that in a second here. And the last one I would say is really a communication alignment, right? Who do we inform on what metrics and how often, right? How do our stakeholders stay informed about our program, our process, the outcomes, any actions that they may need to take, right? This is a big question. This is really hard. We can probably have a whole separate hour conversation on, how do we know the program is achieving its objectives, right? Do we know we're winning? What's the score? Where's the scoreboard, right? Do our stakeholders know where that's at? Do they care? Why don't they care? Are we not talking about the right things? Are we moving the needle, right? So these are all really tough questions that I think need to be kind of addressed at the front end of things and communicated out and kind of pressure tested with, your stakeholders. Do you care about this? Does this make sense, right? Where does your interest lie? And that's where those two things cross, is where we're going to find really good alignment. And these are just four, right? We can probably add some more types here, but we only have an hour. So the other thing we wanted to touch on is really focusing on like those functional groups, those stakeholder relationships, right? Because I think that's really where a lot of the hard work is going to happen, and kind of have the most ability to kind of move the program forward. We've seen programs stall in this kind of phase where they're just not able to create those relationships and kind of get that alignment with these different groups. So I figured, Tom, it would be fun for us to kind of go around the horn here, identify some of the top four stakeholder groups, and kind of just share what it might look like or feel like when we don't have alignment, when things are, could be better, and we're working towards that. So this may trigger some people, but I think it'll be a fun little exercise. The first is probably key, most critical for TPM is probably InfoSec, right? When we don't have alignment, you're probably going to see things like no framework on how to apply internal policies or controls to my third parties, right? We know we follow things internally, but I'm not quite sure how they apply to my third parties, right? I may not have a standard assessment methodology that's tied into internal controls and internal policies, right? Risks that I may identify in my third party space are sitting kind of in the ether, right? They're not tied to a broader risk register with the business, right? If you think about it, the business has a set of risks that they identify and address and manage, right? And the third party risks should be part of that. They're simply an extension of that business process that's just been outsourced. So why is that not kind of a single view, right? When you don't have alignment, you're going to have those two things totally disconnected. And I think the biggest one would be InfoSec doesn't care about TPRM and they don't see a need for alignment. They're just like, hey, I want to have my blinders on and third parties here, and they kind of scope it out. Not the case, right? So those are kind of some things you might see when you don't see alignment. Tom, any other things that you might add? If you're on the bad side of the equation.
You're just talking about the relationship with InfoSec and TPRM, or you talking about
when you don't have alignment, things you might see or feel or might experience from a TPRM perspective.
Yeah, the worst thing that can happen is something is not reported that you found, and you couldn't reach out to the right organization to share with them this risk component that just hasn't been covered. One of the ones that I would probably jump on here would be, for instance, privacy. Okay. By law, whether it's state law or whether it's GDPR, you have to keep track of all your data, where it's flowing. All outbound has to be tracked, has to be traced down to your third parties through your fourth parties. So it's important that as part of your alignment that you're keeping the organization. InfoSec, yes, but let's not forget what privacy needs to know. Where's my data going? Is there anything we need to know from an international perspective? Is there anything we need to know from a state perspective? And folks, the one thing I want to make sure that you're aware of too is we're talking privacy data, not just for any clients, but for your own employees. A lot of organizations forget about their own employee data. So you have to make sure any type of personally identifiable information falls into the privacy space with the controls that are defined in the information security space. So that's why it's always good to have such relationships in your program alignment. You have to let people know what the data is, what's the scope of work, and by doing the assessment, tied in appropriately into that scope of work. So you don't want to be asking questions that are irrelevant based on the data, based on the records, based on the scope of work. So that's how all of these things come and tie into this soup, so to speak, of a third-party risk program.
Yeah, another one that's big is just the business. How does your program interact with the business? I would say when there's little to no alignment, they simply see a TPRM program as a kind of a necessary evil, right? Nothing more than a toll gate or a checkbox that I need to get through in order to do what I need to do, right? It's the last call they're going to make when they're engaging a new third party for some initiative, right? Worst thing is you get notified after the fact. It's like, hey, yeah, we're doing this. The train has left the station. We're just letting you know if you kind of want to hop on in that case. So not being part of a selection process or an RFP process, bad sign, really pointing to bad alignment there. Another one would be seeing security as kind of a TPRM problem or responsibility. That's a big one, right? When we start to see the business kind of assume some of that responsibility and ownership that, the security and risk of a third party is part of my responsibility. It's part of, it's part of my job, and they have some skin in the game. That's when you see a shift, right? And that is not something that happens overnight. Another big one, Tom, and you and I have talked about this too, is, this rolling, right? Which is, we are moving forward. We don't care what you have to say. You're not allowed to say no, essentially, from a risk standpoint. And the business is going to do what the business is going to do because the upside or the benefit is just so great. It doesn't really matter. So it becomes less of a conversation on how we can do it and more of we're doing it regardless of, whatever type of risk we may encounter along the way. And to me, that's probably the biggest red flag from a business TPM alignment standpoint.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Chris. And I believe this is where you need to go back to the analogy of planting a flag. You need to have a flag planted in your program as to what your program, the third-party risk program, is allowed to do. Are you an advisory role to the third party? Or excuse me, you're an advisory role to the business, saying we're advising you not to move forward with this particular vendor because it doesn't match our security and risk posture? Or do you have the ability to plant a flag and saying, we will not allow you to move forward with this because it's out of alignment of our security risk posture? And, one of the things that I did when I was running my program was I've often used the term, we had a blackjack hand, where my group personally turned away 21 vendors from doing business with our organization because the vendors could not meet the expectations based on the scope of work, based on the processing they were doing to the organization. They could not live up to our security and privacy controls. Now, is that saying that we're not going to do business with them in the future? No, but they have to provide us assurance. They have to provide us evidence that they've addressed those. We call them contingent items. Most people might call them observations or issues, etc. So if you're going to plant that flag, and you're going to be able to have the ability of another group, maybe a governance group, to be able to take a look at that and say, okay, we're going to now have a conversation with the stakeholder and say, we will permit you to go through under these certain conditions. That's fine. The importance that I'm going to share with everybody here today is make sure you have that documented. That is so important, because if you don't have that documented and a business unit goes off and does something, it's going to come back to you on your third-party risk program. And you want to make sure that you have something in place that says, hey, look, we told them, we advised them not to go through with this. They did it anyway. Don't come in and yell at me. Go after the individual who made the ultimate decision. Yeah. So it's important that you have that
personally,
documented.
I think that's the right approach, right? That's the advisory type approach, where you don't want to be seen as you can shut things down, right? You want to allow kind of a partnership there, or say, hey, let's figure this out together. But ultimately, the business has the authority to kind of move forward. And I like to use the doctor-patient relationship. Yes, let's just pretend we're all, in the field of medicine and we're all doctors and we all went to medical school, right? We all go to the doctor. Personally, I see a doctor as an advisor. Most of the time I'm listening to my doctor because for those reasons, they went to school, they have the training, the expertise, and they're providing me with really valuable information that's in my best interest, right? But at the end of the day, I can ignore that, right? My doctor says, hey, can't play golf anymore, John. You're going to mess your shoulder up. I'm probably going to say thank you for the information and book my tea time, right? The upside for me is too good to not continue to do that. So I think we try and get to a point where we can say yes, but, right? As an advisor, we're not the party of no. We say yes, but here's some options. Here's how we can work together to achieve what, the business objective, at the same time doing it securely, within the confines of our program requirements, right? So that's where you get that two-way kind of street, that conversation, that relationship with the business. So
if I could, I want to jump in real quick, guys. A question kind of goes along with what Tom was talking about earlier. What if that vendor, that high-risk vendor, is the only company that provides that piece for you? You're kind of over a barrel at that point. What do you do?
Yeah, there's times where you can consider them to be either a single source provider or a sole source provider. One of the things that you do in that situation, if you have to do business with them because they're the only game in town, or you may have some other type of contractual obligation that you need to do that, the best thing you could do is try to talk to the vendor, try to talk to the business unit, because don't forget, they're the ones writing the check, and say, we don't want to be exposed to this risk. Now, what we could do, and we've done this in the infancy of a lot of of our program with a lot of younger, more immature vendors is take off the assessor hat on, put on the consultant hat and say, let us help you get up to our security and privacy posture. That way, we're not being Dr. No and telling them they can't do business with us. We're now partnering with them. And that's the value that third-party risk can bring to the business unit and to the organization by saying, now I got a partnership with the vendor because we want them to be successful. We want to use this vendor. We want to assist the business unit. And they remember that. The business remembers it. The vendor is much more in the future. Hey, these guys helped me. I'm more than willing to hear what they have to say to make sure that I'm in alignment with what they need from a controls perspective. And we've actually had vendors reach back to us and said, thank you, because you've made my controls stronger, that when some other outsourcer pinged me to do business with them, I was now prepared to provide evidence that we had addressed those control vulnerabilities. And now, guess what? We as a vendor took on additional business because you helped us raise the bar. So it's a feather in the cap, and it's a win-win across the board for both us, the business unit, along with the vendor.
Yeah, even better if you can take that consultant advisor approach to the third party, right? And see, not be an auditor where you come in, you identify some risks and some insurmountable kind of challenges and say, hey, throw it over the fence, go fix it. Can't work with us until you're here. Not a good long-term approach, right? That's not how partnerships work. So if you can spend more time kind of talking through the solutions and having different options, right? Having a one-size-fits-all program is really not it's not feasible to operate like that, where it's so strict and so rigid that there's really no room for applying some nuance, because all of these business relationships with these third parties are really different. So taking that approach, I think goes a long way. So let's kind of maybe, Tom, take the flip side. We kind of said, hey, here's what alignment may feel like when it's not going well, or some of the challenges you may see working with the business. Let's kind of spin it to the positive a little bit, right? When you do have alignment, what are you going to see, or kind of what are you feeling with your business? I kind of mentioned it earlier, but they see you as adding value. The program is valuable. You're there to support them and enable them as they work to achieve their business objectives, right? They see us as advisors to the business, right? It's more proactive, right? It's not the last call they make, but when we're looking at selection, right? We're brought in at the very beginning, and TPRM is kind of baked into that selection process, right? Requirements are known from the start at the third party. It's not, hey, we save it on the back end because third party is totally surprised by the requirements and controls that we're asking them to have in place, right? If there's big surprises at the last minute, that is that's a bad sign. But being aware of that up front, that's great alignment, right? And then just seeing like the third parties as an extension, or the program as an extension of the business, right? Those are all good signs and kind of green flags when you do have alignment. Anything else you'd add there, Tom, on the positive side of things?
Yeah, historically, third-party risk programs are very reactionary. Mm-hmm. Okay, I got 10 assessments that just came in. We got to get these lined up, and we got to start moving forward. We got to get these out of the queue. What third-party risk program managers have a very bad history of doing is being proactive. One of the things that I made it a point was anytime I had to travel to headquarters, or I traveled to one of our other operational facilities, was I got in front of the critical business units being IT, critical business units with procurement and sourcing, and any other organizations. And I would do historical analysis. I'd be able to go into my GRC platform and see, do we have any reassessments coming due in the next 6 months? Do we have anything from a perspective of, am I seeing any trends with the business unit? And I would actually go out there and I would actually sit with the business unit leaders and say, it's January. What do you have coming up within the next 6 or 7 months that we should be aware of so we can get these in the queue? Because what's going through my mind? Okay, you're going to be doing business. You're looking to transact business with a new vendor in May, June, July. Those are the summer months. Do I have the staff available to perform these assessments? Is the vendor going to be available to have their people go through these assessments? So these are the things that are going through my mind on the proactive side of the house and say, okay, let's take a look at these. Let's see if we can start lining these up now so we don't have a headache come May, June, and July. Maybe we could bump something up into April. Maybe we could sit there and say, hey, let's break this up into 2 phases because there's an international component and there's a local component, whatever the case may be. So it's working with the business unit. And this gets back to what we were talking about being a business enabler, the value we bring. It's being able to smooth those relationships out. And it's really what we're talking flags, what puts a flag in your office, as to how good of a business partner you are working with them. And trust me when I tell you this, folks, this goes right all the way up to the C-suite. They hear about the value you're bringing to the business units, and they respond to that in kind.
Yeah, I love that. I want to address a question from one of our listeners around ranking third parties. I think from basically it sounds like a risk perspective. How have you seen third party suppliers ranked in terms of priority based on the services provided or by the data that they have access to? So that's a great question. And I hate to use the pat consultant answer, but it depends, right? We do professional service for our customers that are maybe just starting out and they need to build a foundation for a program, like a design and build, before they start even thinking about software to kind of enable or automate it. And I like to keep it super simple to start, right? And I think you hit it right on the head. A really easy way to start and a simple kind of foolproof way is really to align the risk of your third party to data risk. That's kind of the first component of a risk-based methodology, right? And then from there, because that's typically what we have the best grasp of within our third parties. But as we collect more information, right, as we start working closer with our business and our business knows more about the third party, or they're expected to know more about that third party, we have a broader profile. It's not just the type of data they have, but it's the volume. It's what type of systems they may have access to. It's what their criticality of the vendor is and their impact if they go down, right? So data risk to me is probably number one that would inform a risk methodology. And then slowly you can layer in and make that a little more complex and nuanced to get a pinpoint more focus on the type of risk and how that may change, right? But that's a great question, and we've seen lots of different approaches and methodologies to arrive at how do you risk rank your vendors. And then the important thing is that you apply different levels of due diligence based on that risk. There's really no point in categorizing your vendors by risk if you're, at the end of the day, you're going to do the same thing, right? The same level of due diligence, right? One size fits all. So that's the important part, is keep it simple, even if you have, 3 or 4 categories, critical, high, medium, low. And then the important part is, like I said, you have a slightly different approach based on that risk. Otherwise, you're kind of spending your resources inefficiently, right? Why am I going to go out and do all of this work for a third party that's of, that I consider of low or nominal risk? That's inefficient, right? So great question. Okay, let's take another stakeholder group here, right? Risk, right? Third party risk management, right? A lot of us are sitting in maybe a bigger organization that has a broader risk function. So when you have alignment from a risk perspective, we understand how third party kind of fits in that broader risk management approach for your organization. And I think the big one that comes to my mind is how, we just talked about it. Chris just says, like, how do we risk rank our vendors, right? Do we need to work with, a risk function to kind of help us determine what that methodology is? What about when we identify risk? How do we classify those things that we identify, right? There's activities going on elsewhere in the organization that may or may not be following some program different. If so, why? Should they be the same? Those are some of the questions we want to start to ask to start working towards an alignment there with, risk across the organization. Anything you want to add there, Tom? I know that's we're trying to fit a last couple topics in as we work towards the bottom of the hour here, but
yeah, you mentioned this, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Third-party risk is encompassing so much more than just security risks. So depending on the charter that you have for your program, you may be tasked to take a look at things that are outside of information security, such as whether it's geolocational risk. When you start to take a look at the political climate in the world today, geolocational risk. Where is my data? Do I have concerns about being over in the East China Sea for processing? Do I have concerns of it being over in Eastern Europe? Start looking at things from, other things that could tie into geopolitical events. Could even be labor. What are you seeing from a labor perspective, labor movements, etc. So you have to be able to keep your finger on the pulse. And there's also some organizations that are saying, or they're tasking third-party risk programs to take a deeper dive into financial risk. Are you seeing anything with the dark web that could affect us from a social media perspective, from a reputational risk perspective? Anything from an ESG, environmental, social, and governance perspective that we have to start working, because it's the initiatives, whether it's through a regulated body such as the SEC, or whether it's the mantra coming down from the higher ups in the C-level. So you have to be able to be fluid enough to be able to look and to see if you can take those on. And do you have the appropriate tools to do this? Do you have the appropriate staffing to do this? If they're asking you to take this on, this is a great opportunity for you to raise your hand and say, hey, look, I need some assistance with this. What exactly are you looking for? I may be great in monitoring things from the cyber perspective. I may be great in doing the assessments, but I need to make sure that I can achieve the goals, the risk management goals, the risk mitigation goals of the overall entity by making sure that I have what I need from being able to execute what we need to do from a third-party risk perspective, taking on these other risk verticals. So it's very important that you have those working relationships, as John mentioned, with respect to either the chief risk officer or some other organization that oversees corporate risk.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, if those don't exist, what a great way for your program to add value to say, hey, like you said, we've planted the flag and now we're thinking about expanding, right? You have that in with your third parties. So you're kind of the point of contact, and we've seen third party kind of be the lead or the quarterback with those engagements and those interactions, right? To say, we're focused on security risk and control risk, but wow, I have a resiliency function here, or a compliance function, or privacy. How can we layer that in to kind of be more efficient and kind of go to the vendor kind of in a unified, approach, right? Where we're not just, different groups kind of peppering them at the same time. So I think it's a great point to think about how you can add value if those functions don't exist, to say, here's the different domains that we're now thinking about considering to have a more well-rounded kind of risk approach for those third parties. That's actually a really good point. The last kind of category here is procurement, right? So Tom, let's talk about when we do have alignment, what do we see when we have a third-party group working with procurement? I'll throw out a couple here, and I kind of mentioned them earlier, but First and foremost, simplest one is any due diligence is occurring before the contract is signed, right? Got to maintain that leverage up front for, addressing or remediating some of those key controls or showstoppers, as I'd like to say. Like people have been through buying, purchasing a home. You wouldn't dare think about doing your home inspection after you sign the contract. It literally does not make sense, right? Once you do, you've lost the leverage. And we see that a lot in some kind of less mature organizations where the business moves forward, they sign, and then it's like, okay, TPRM, go do your thing. And you got your hands tied, right? And you can't really, help the business from a security standpoint when you got your hands tied like that. So that's the most obvious one for me. And the other one I did mention is really eliminating surprises on the back end, right? It shouldn't be a surprise. I mentioned I came from JP Morgan Chase. Actually, just before this call, I went out to see if they still had all of their minimum security control requirements available out there, and they do. I'm actually pasting it right there. So if you want to be a vendor of JP Morgan Chase, they give you the answers to the test. This is the minimum baseline. I love that approach. I think that's a best in class, best practice for everyone to kind of follow. Say, we know what our requirements are internally. Here's what they are for our third-party inventory, and we're going to share that with you up front. It's in the contract. It's available. It's not a surprise. If the first time they're hearing about that is, when we actually sit down with someone, a third party, that we've missed the mark, right? So I've shared that there for to kind of illustrate the example, but those are two big ones from my opinion. Tom, anything you would add there from a procurement standpoint?
No, I love what you did with the JP Morgan. I think that's amazing. One of the things that we try to do to help the business units and procurement is over the years created what we call a vendor information controls check sheet. And we, depending on the data that was going to be going to the prospective vendor, what we actually did was we created this check sheet and we made it as part of the RFP process. So the purpose of that was when the RFPs come back to procurement at first was like, well, we don't know what to look at. And we said, no, we'll look at it. We can tell you within 2 minutes whether we're comfortable with this vendor at a very high level or not. And we use those questions directly from the SIG as part of the assessment. So it's kind of like, it's like getting one of those credit cards you've been pre-approved. This is part of that pre-approval process of saying, okay, we seem to be at a very high level, pretty comfortable that you have some things here. Now, if we start looking forward, if we start going through the assessment phase, now we're going to start diving deeper. So having that transparency with vendors, I think, is very important. And you do that through the procurement phase. I think it's always very important to make sure that you have those relationships with procurement, including critical documentation, such as a fully executed contract, anything that respectfully ties into the processing of the data. If you're in the healthcare industry, for instance, do you have access to, meaning the assessor have access to the business associate agreement, making sure that's appropriate and it's on file and it's up to date? Do you have any other data privacy and security addendums of any changes that the organization has made with respect to requirements, like you mentioned before? Have there been any changes made that we need to put forth, and making sure that that is part of an addendum to the contract that's going to do business? So that's all tied into the procurement and third-party risk relationship. So this is going to be one of the closest relationships you're going to have in third-party risk is with procurement, and it's very vital too. There's other tips that I could certainly share with you and share with the folks here. I think another one that's you're starting to see much more of this is that if you're starting to see vendors that are saying, I'm not going through an assessment, I'm not doing this. And you might see this with existing vendors. I don't got time for that. I'm not doing this. Well, you're technically in violation of the contract. And I actually had a superpower that enabled me to reach out to sourcing and procurement and say, I want to withhold any and outstanding funds to this given provider until they go through the vendor assessment program. And that woke up a lot of eyes, because if you threaten to shut off the financial spigot, people are going to respond. So that was a certain power that I had, but that was through the relationship that I had with sourcing and procurement backing me up for that. And again, we view this as a violation of our contractual agreement. So again, this is part of having that strong relationship with sourcing and procurement.
Yeah, love it. Even if it's not, even if those things aren't in the contract, I think another green flag would be, like you said, having a relationship with procurement that anything identified by TPRM, is funneled back into that conversation at contract renewal, right? How do you maximize the leverage that you have? It's at the beginning and, right before you're about to sign, essentially, right? So if you miss those opportunities, we're missing a really big chance to move the needle from a risk standpoint, 100%. Right. All right, Tom B, we're going to maybe turn it back over to you. We left you absolutely no time, actually negative time. So bring us home.
Appreciate that, guys. Thanks a lot. No, honestly, good stuff, though, really. I have a couple of questions. If everybody wants to hang out, I've got a couple. You can answer them quickly or long, however you guys want. But it got me thinking, going down that rabbit hole. I've got my vendors, but what about my vendors' vendors and their vendors and their vendors? And how do you get everybody on the same page? I mean, that just sounds like it's impossible. But I do like how John, by the way, shared that link from JP Chase Morgan. I threw that out to the audience. So you guys check that out, because that actually might help in this scenario, I think. But what do you think? Vendors, vendors, vendors. How does that work?
You want me to jump on this one, John?
That looked like a yes to me.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Silence is golden. Here's the dirty little secret about dealing with downstream vendors. First off, when you're looking at fourth parties, if you don't have a direct relationship with them already, it's nearly impossible to assess them, because they owe you nothing. You don't have a relationship with them. So you have to rely on your third parties and say, hey, show me how you've done your due diligence. Don't share the report with me, because you could be in violation of the non-disclosure agreement between the third and fourth party. But show me, I need to get comfortable that you have done what I consider to be proper due diligence in this space, okay? But the other things that you can do is you can perform continuous monitoring on those fourth parties, because that's open. The tools that are out there to do monitoring, whether it's cyber, whether it's financial, or anything else that's out there, legal, that's all an open book. So you can do your due diligence and bring that back to the business unit and say, hey, here's some things we found out with a particular downstream vendor that's being used by our third party. I'm comfortable with it, or I may not be comfortable with it, and now I think this is a conversation we need to have with the third party. And I've seen a lot of that as well.
Yeah, all I would say there is nail your third-party relationships first, right? And then figure out how you expand beyond that, right? Yeah. And if you're going to start with fourth parties, start with inventory and awareness, right? You can't, like Tom, to your point, it's a great point. Like, you can't jump right in and, expect to get the same, level of cooperation and engagement that you're going to get with a third party where you have a signed contract, right? So I'd realistic with what you can accomplish and ask yourself, is that really moving the needle, right? I like to make a golf analogy, right? You play from the right tees, and you don't move back until, you break 70 from the white tees, right? It's kind of the same approach. You nail your third-party relationships. Once you're breaking 70, okay, now let's talk about how we go wrap our arms around fourth parties, right? To me, it's a little bit silly to jump ahead when you're not nailing, the basics. So I'll leave you with that.
Explains a few things about my golf game. I always use the tee that was closer to the hole. I'm like, why would I go further back? This makes no sense to me. Okay, appreciate that. Maybe that'll work for me. No.
I ran into that.
Really appreciate that.
Tom, I read into that. I'm not playing golf with John.
Right.
I'm not.
Right.
I'm not qualified to. I can't live up to his expectations.
That's all I have is expectations.
I love it. I love it. Well, along those lines, though, I mean, I think that actually kind of goes into a few things that I was just jotting down notes as you guys were talking. But I wrote down brand risk because obviously that plays into this whole scenario. The reputation as well. So if people start thinking of you as a shop that doesn't have their stuff together, eventually people are going to stop using your services and products. So at some point, do you guys think, you guys were talking about the positives here, that's kind of leading down the negative path, right? But if you get all your stuff, your ducks in a row, all of a sudden you can become a business differentiator. So you are enabling the business, but you're actually somebody that people want to do business with because you are enabling this third-party risk program to happen. So
yeah.
Any thoughts around that, or am I off base?
Yeah, no, you nailed it. That's been I'd say that tide has shifted probably in the last couple years, maybe, where vendors used to be just kind of drug along. It's like, hey, you're part of the process. This is what you're doing, whether you like it or not, right? Somewhere along the line, they kind of took control of the situation because they just got dragged around and pushed around and beat up so much. They said, I can control this. I see this as a business driver, right? In a brand, like a feather in the cap, right? So we've done the work. Now let's kind of brag about it. Let's be proactive with, what we've done to get our security posture where it is, and not sit back and wait for folks to kind of pull it out of us, right? So we've seen that shift in a really big way in the last couple of years, 100%. And there's lots of examples you can point to, a lot of software and tools that are available that enable that type of approach, right? You see kind of public trust centers. Whistic has a similar thing called Profile, which is essentially like a LinkedIn for your security posture. It's like, here's what we've done, tell the world, and make everyone aware of what you're doing before they even come knocking on your door. So
that's cool.
Yeah,
I like it. Okay, gentlemen, that does kind of wrap up our time together. Oh, wait, one thing, though, because I want to know. Inquiring minds want to know. What mountain is that?
Oh, someone got the answer right. That is K2.
Well done.
K2.
Well done. Who was that?
K2. Who was that? Someone got it right.
Hopefully they don't mind us telling their name. Where did you go?
Leah? Or they? Weaver. Yep.
Yeah, Leah Weaver. Well done. Good job. John owes you something. I don't know what that is, but he said there was a prize. So hit John up for a prize. No, but seriously, parting thoughts, guys. If nothing else, we'll start with Tom because he's got a great name. Tom, and I also misspelled your last name. Sorry about that. Give the audience some homework. If nothing else, what should they have gotten out of this, or what can they start doing tomorrow?
Talk to your partners. I think that's the most critical one. Let's start with this first. Take a look at your program. What can make your program stronger? What can enhance your program? Then find out who you need to talk to in your relationship chain. Do you need to talk to somebody in security? Do you need to talk to somebody in privacy, procurement, etc.? This is a great opportunity because it's at the beginning of the year to start taking a look at your wish list, for lack of a better word, and start diving into, hey, this is going to make our program better. Here's why. And be prepared to provide them tangibles. They want to see the receipts.
You got to have that why, because everybody asks, so what? If anything, I used to sell copiers a million years ago, and that was always the thing. At the end of the day, so what? Why is this important to me? Because everybody needs to know that. So
yes,
appreciate that. Thank you, Tom.
Tom stole mine, so I'm going to go with the same thing, right? Maybe slightly different. Take a consultant mindset. Kind of change the way you think about your program and how you go about your day-to-day. Talking to your partners is absolutely critical. If you go into those conversations with a consultant mindset, and think of them as your internal customers and how you can serve them in the business, that will transform the the tone of that interaction and that conversation 180 degrees. So I also agree with Tom, is when you're kind of stuck in your world, your blinders, your program, you're this, you're that, get out, talk to your customers if you're thinking about them as internal customers, and ask them and listen to what they say. That is going to move your program forward no matter what, 100%, I guarantee it.
The only thing I would add is that, to me, sometimes the word vendor kind of has a negative connotation to it. I don't know why, because that's where we buy products and services from. But I mean, look at these people as partners. These are partners. If you're working with a partner, you're going to want to do stuff for them. A vendor is like, oh God, I got this vendor asking me questions over here, versus my partner, John, needs some help. So I'm going to go help him. There's a difference to it. And I think that we need to start kind of thinking things a little differently. And that kind of helps with when we're dealing with folks, because at the end of the day, we have to deal with one another. We can't rely on the computers anymore, because that didn't work for the last 30 years. So we have to start relying on one another again to do these things and to get these stakeholders in these different groups, right? So we have to start talking to one another. So I'll get off the soapbox on that, because everybody has their job to do today. Some of that is going to be risk related, I'm sure. But hey, we've got more stuff coming up. Tomorrow, I've got Cyber Debrief, what's cooking the last 60, 90 days in the world and kind of here at home. We'll have BJ Viswanathan and Cedric Layton on that one. We're doing Guarding the Cloud on February 6th. Then we're going to be doing how better security governance reduces legal risks. Sort of a follow-up here. February 8th, excuse me. Then we have State of the Fish coming up in March. We've also got, if I'm not mistaken, on February 28th, our financial services virtual conference is happening. So lots of stuff happening at Secure World, as always. I've got some links in the resource tab for you. Check that stuff out. Everything digital is free. That's what I love about my stuff. If you're in the audience, everything's free, and you get educational credits for it. So I love what I do. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today again. So that being said, grab that certificate of attendance if you haven't already, and the slides in case you need those for your certifying body. Sorry, I saw a note pop up there last second. But thank you all for joining us. This concludes the life of the party, how to make third-party risk management a connector across the business and apparently a differentiator. So you heard it here. We'll see you at the next remote session tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, John. Thanks, Tom.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you all.